The outsider, the shuttle descended through clouds of purple gas and broke into clear sky above Vesser Prime. And Eli Vance pressed his face against the window like a child seeing snow for the first time. Though he was 22 years old and had traveled across 3 star systems to reach this moment, the Galactic Military Academy spread across the horizon like a city made of black glass and silver metal, its towers reaching toward the alien sun that burned orange in the morning sky. And Eli felt his stomach twist with a mixture of excitement and fear that he could not quite name. He was the first human ever accepted into this program, and that fact sat heavy on his shoulders like a weight he could not put down. The shuttle landed with a soft hum. And when the doors opened, Eli grabbed his single bag and stepped onto soil that no human had ever walked on before. And the air smelled strange, like copper and flowers mixed together. And he took a deep breath and started walking toward the main building. Other cadets moved around him in groups, talking and laughing in languages his translator chip struggled to keep up with. And none of them looked at him, which was fine, which was expected, which was something he had prepared himself for during the long journey from Earth of Valkyrian passed close by. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, with 4 muscular arms and eyes that split into hundreds of tiny segments like shattered mirrors. And Eli had to remind himself not to stare because staring was rude on most worlds, and he did not want to start his time here by making enemies. He found the registration office after asking directions twice and getting lost once. And the administrator behind the desk was a creature he did not recognize. Something like a floating jellyfish with tentacles that typed on multiple keyboards at once. Name, the creature said without looking up. Eli Vance. From Earth, the tentacles stopped moving, and the jellyfish creature rose slightly higher in the air, its body pulsing with colors that shifted from blue to yellow to a deep red that Eli hoped did not mean anger. The human, it said, and there was something in its voice that Eli could not read. Something that might have been curiosity, or might have been disgust, or might have been nothing at all. Yes, Eli said. Because what else could he say? The creature handed him a data tablet and a room assignment and a schedule. And then it went back to its work as if Eli had already disappeared. And maybe in a way he had. Because he was so small and so ordinary compared to everything around him. His room was on the 4th floor of a dormitory building that smelled like cleaning chemicals and something else. Something organic that he tried not to think about too hard, and his roommate had not arrived yet, which gave him time to unpack his few belongings and sit on the bed that was too hard and stare at the ceiling that was too high. Tomorrow would be his first day of actual classes, and he would meet the cadets he would train with for the next 4 years. And they would see him and judge him and find him lacking. And he knew this because he had read the reports and studied the data and understood exactly how most species in the galaxy viewed humans. They saw weakness where humans saw flexibility. And they saw softness where humans saw adaptability. And they saw a young species barely out of its cradle reaching for stars. It had no business touching. Eli closed his eyes and thought about his father, who had worked the asteroid mines until his lungs gave out, and his mother, who had raised 3 children on a station where the air recyclers broke down twice a year. And he thought about every human who had struggled and fought and refused to die even when the universe seemed designed to kill them. He was here for all of them. And he would not fail. The next morning came too fast. And Eli dressed in the plain gray uniform that all first-year cadets wore. And he looked at himself in the mirror and saw nothing special. Just a young man with brown skin and dark eyes and hair that never stayed flat no matter how much he tried to fix it. The classroom was a curved room built like a theater, with seats rising up in tiers around a central platform where the instructor would stand. And when Eli walked through the door, every conversation stopped at once, and every eye and sensor and sensory organ turned to look at him. He felt their stares like physical weight pressing down on his chest. But he kept his face calm and his breathing steady. And he walked to the back row and sat down in a seat that put a wall at his back. Because that was what his training had taught him. Always know your exits. Always protect your blind spots. The other cadets turned back to their conversations, but now they had a new topic. And Eli did not need his translator chip to understand that they were talking about him. A group of Volcorians sat near the front, their forearms gesturing as they spoke in rapid clicking sounds. And one of them kept glancing back at Eli with an expression that looked like amusement. The Ythrani were easier to read because their emotions showed in the lights that pulsed beneath their pale skin. And right now those lights flickered with curiosity and something darker. Something that might have been contempt. And then there were the Korth. Massive creatures with bodies like living stone. Gray and cracked and ancient-looking, even though the ones in this room were probably young by their species standards. And they did not bother to hide their stares. They simply looked at Eli the way someone might look at an insect that had wandered into the air. Home the instructor arrived before anyone could speak to him directly. And for that, Eli was grateful. Her name was Vethel. And she was Valkorian, but older than the cadets, with scars crossing two of her arms and one eye that had been replaced with something mechanical that glowed faint red in the classroom light. "I am Senior Instructor Vethel," she said, and her voice filled the room without effort. "And I will be responsible for your tactical education for the next 4 years, assuming any of you survive that long." She paused, and her working eye swept across the room, landing briefly on each cadet before moving on. And when her gaze reached Eli, it stayed there for half a second longer than it had on anyone else. "You will introduce yourselves," she continued, starting with the front row. "And you will tell us your name, your homeworld, and one fact about your species that you believe makes you suited for military command." The introductions began, and Eli listened carefully, learning names and faces and capabilities that might one day matter on a battlefield. The Valkorians spoke of their strength and their ability to use 4 weapons at once. And the Ythrani spoke of their telepathic coordination and their immunity to pain. And the Korth spoke of their near-indestructible bodies and their ability to survive in vacuum, without suits. And then it was Eli's turn. And the room went quiet again, and every cadet leaned forward just slightly, waiting to hear what the weak little human could possibly offer. He stood up slowly, and he looked at the instructor rather than the other cadets. And he spoke in a voice that was calm and even and utterly unremarkable. "My name is Eli Vance, and I am from Earth." He paused, and he could feel them waiting, hungry for more, ready to laugh. "That is all," he said, and he sat back down. The silence stretched for 3 long seconds. And then someone in the middle rows made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been a cough. And then Instructor Vethel rose and moved on to the next topic. She had seen his file, and she knew what he was not saying, but the other cadets did not know. And they looked at the quiet human in the back row, and they saw nothing worth respecting. They would learn, but that lesson would come later, paid for in fear and fire and chaos that none of them could imagine for now. Eli simply sat and watched and waited, because patience was something humans understood very well. And he had learned long ago that the loudest voice in the room was rarely the most dangerous one. The mockery deepened. 6 weeks passed at the Galactic Military Academy, and Eli Vance became invisible in the way that prey animals become invisible. By staying quiet and staying still and never drawing attention that could be avoided, he sat in the same seat every day, the one in the back corner with the wall behind him. And he took notes on his data tablet while the other cadets answered questions and debated tactics and competed for the instructors. Approval. His written examination scores were perfect. Every single one. But no one seemed to notice because written scores were not as impressive as physical demonstrations or loud, confident voices. And Eli had neither of those things to offer. He ate alone in the dining hall, at a small table near the recycling station, where the smell kept most other cadets away. And he did not mind the smell, because he had grown up on mining stations where the air was never quite right and you learned to ignore what you could not change. The other cadets had formed groups by now, alliances based on species and homeworld and family connections that stretched back generations. And there was no group for a single human with no family name worth mentioning and no military tradition to claim. Corax noticed him first. Or at least Corax was the first to make his noticing into a public performance. The young Korth came from a family that had produced generals and admirals for 12 generations. And his stone-gray skin was marked with ceremonial scars that showed his lineage, and when he walked through a room, other cadets moved out of his way without being asked. He found Eli in the dining hall on a morning when the orange sun was hidden behind clouds and the light through the windows was dim and gray. "Human," Corax said, and his voice was like rocks grinding together in a machine. Deep and rough and impossible to ignore. Eli looked up from his food, which was a paste that the dispensers claimed was nutritionally appropriate for his species, but tasted like wet cardboard. "And he waited. I have been watching you," Corax continued. And he sat down across from Eli without asking permission, and the table creaked under his weight. "And I am trying to understand why you are here. I was accepted into the program," Eli said. "Same as everyone else." Corax made a sound that might have been a laugh. And other cadets were watching now, drawn by the possibility of entertainment. And Eli could feel their eyes like insects crawling on his skin. "Accepted," Corax repeated. "Yes, but why? That is what I do not understand. Because when I look at you, I see nothing that belongs in a military academy." He reached across the table with one massive hand and poked Eli's shoulder. Not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to make a point. And Eli did not flinch, did not move, did not react at all. "Soft," Corax said. "Your skin is soft. Your bones are fragile. You have no claws, no armor, no venom, no natural weapons of any kind. And your species has only been traveling between stars for what? 200 years. About that," Eli agreed. "My people have been warriors for 20,000 years," Corax said. And there was pride in his voice, the kind of pride that came from never having to question your place in the universe. "And in all that time, we have never lost a war. Not once. Not ever. Impressive," Eli said. And he meant it, because it was impressive. Even if it was being used as a weapon against him. "And yet here you sit," Corax continued, "eating your paste and taking your notes and pretending that you belong among us, when everyone in this room knows that you do not." The watching cadets made sounds of agreement, clicks and hums and pulses of light that all meant the same thing. And Eli looked at them and saw what they wanted him to see. A small, weak creature surrounded by predators, outnumbered and outmatched and utterly alone. "Maybe," Eli said quietly. "Or maybe you are wrong." Corax stared at him for a long moment. And then he stood up and walked away, and the other cadets followed. And Eli was alone again with his cardboard paste and his data tablet and the weight of 100 judgments pressing down on him. The mockery did not stop after that. It only grew more creative. Scylla, a youth Ronnie whose bioluminescent patterns were particularly bright and complex, made a game of imitating Eli's quiet voice and small movements. And the other youth Ronnie flickered with amusement whenever she performed her impressions. "Look at me," Scylla would say in a whisper, hunching her shoulders and making herself smaller. "I am a human. I am very tired because I need to sleep for 8 hours every night. I am so inefficient that it is amazing my species survived at all." The Valkyrians found humor in Eli's lack of arms, and they would juggle objects with their 4 limbs while asking him to join. knowing that he could not possibly keep up. And their compound eyes would glitter with cruel amusement when he declined, and the Korth, led by Korax, simply treated him as if he did not exist. Walking through spaces he occupied, speaking over him when he tried to contribute to discussions. Acting as if his presence was a mistake that would eventually be corrected, Eli endured it all. And he did not complain, and he did not fight back. And some of the cadets began to wonder if he was simply too stupid to understand that he was being insulted. But Instructor Vethel watched from her place at the front of the classroom. And she saw things the cadets did not see. She saw the way Eli's eyes tracked movement, always aware of where everyone was. Always calculating distances and angles and potential threats. She saw the way his hands stayed steady even when the mockery was at its worst. No trembling, no clenching, just calm, controlled stillness, and she saw his examination scores. Perfect marks in tactical theory and strategic planning and psychological analysis. Scores that would have made him the top cadet in the class if anyone bothered to look at the numbers. Instead of the soft human skin, she had read his file before he arrived. And she knew things about humans that most species did not bother to learn. She knew that humans had evolved as persistent predators on a harsh world, chasing prey for hours and days until it collapsed from exhaustion, and that their bodies were designed for endurance rather than raw power. She knew that humans had survived ice ages and plagues and wars that killed millions, and that each time they had fallen, they had gotten back up and kept going. She knew that the human word for this was stubborn, and that it was the most dangerous word in their language, but she said nothing to the other cadets. Because some lessons could not be taught with words. Some lessons had to be learned through experience, through fire and chaos and the kind of fear that stripped away everything except what was truly inside, and she knew that moment was coming, because she had designed the training simulation herself. And she had made sure that Eli Vance would be right in the middle of it when everything fell apart. The other cadets thought they were preparing for ordinary exercises, drills and scenarios that would test their skills in predictable ways. But Vethel had something else planned, something that would show them what they were truly made of and what the quiet human was made of too. For now, Eli continued to sit in his corner and take his notes and endure the mockery with a patience that puzzled those who did not understand it. And he did not know what was coming, but he was ready for it. Because he had been ready for it his whole life. Humans were always ready for disaster. Because disaster was the only constant in their history, the only thing they could truly count on. And they had learned long ago that the ones who survived were not the strongest or the fastest, but the ones who refused to stop when everything said they should. That was the secret that the other cadets had not yet discovered. The thing that made humans dangerous despite their soft skin and fragile bones and need for sleep. They did not know how to give up, and in the chaos that was coming, that would matter more than claws or armor or 20,000 years of unbroken victories. Chaos erupts. The day of the tactical simulation began like any other day, with cadets gathering in the large holographic training chamber and Instructor Vetha standing at the control platform, with her mechanical eye glowing red in the dim light. Today you will face a standard defense scenario, she announced, and her voice echoed off the metal walls. You will be divided into squads and assigned to protect a space station from boarding parties while evacuating civilian personnel. The cadets murmured with excitement, because simulations were more interesting than classroom lectures, and success here would count toward their final rankings. And everyone wanted to prove themselves. Squad assignments are as follows, Vethel continued, reading from her tablet. And she listed names and numbers until she reached the part that made several cadets groan with disappointment. Squad 7, she said. Korax, Scylla, Dren, Molther, and Vance. Eli felt the attention shift to him immediately. felt Corax's stone-cold stare and Scylla's flickering lights that signaled amusement at his expense. And he understood exactly what was happening. He was being placed with the cadets who hated him most. The ones who had spent weeks making his life difficult. And either this was a punishment or it was a test. And he was not sure which possibility was worse. Corax stomped toward him, his massive feet shaking the floor with each step. And he looked down at Eli with an expression that might have been anger or might have been disgust. "Stay out of our way." "Human," Corax said, "we will handle this. And you will do nothing that interferes." Eli nodded. Because there was no point in arguing, not yet. Not when words would only make things worse. The simulation chamber hummed to life around them. And suddenly, they were standing in a space station corridor. Metal walls and flickering lights, and the smell of recycled air that Eli knew so well from his childhood was not real. They all knew it was not real, but the holographic technology was advanced enough that their bodies responded as if it were. Adrenaline and fear and all the instincts that millions of years of evolution had built into their species. "The scenario begins now." Vethal's voice came through the speakers. "You have 30 minutes to evacuate 200 civilians and defend against hostile borders. Good luck." Corax immediately started giving orders, his voice booming through the corridor as he positioned his squad at what he considered strategic locations. And nobody questioned him because he was Corax, and his family had been winning wars since before most species had discovered fire. Ailey took his assigned position near a maintenance access hatch, a spot that Corax had clearly chosen because it was far from any real action. A place to put the useless human where he would not get in the way for the first 5 minutes. Everything went according to plan. Boarders appeared at predicted entry points, and the squad engaged them with practiced efficiency. Corax's stone fists crushing simulated enemies while Scylla coordinated movements with her bioluminescent signals, and the others held defensive lines. Eli watched and waited. Because watching and waiting were the things he did best. And he noticed something that the others did not notice. The pattern was wrong. Boarders in real combat did not attack in neat waves at convenient intervals. They came in chaos and confusion. And this simulation was too orderly, too predictable. Like a test that was waiting to become something else. He was about to say something when the gravity failed. One moment they were standing on solid deck plating. And the next moment they were floating, tumbling, spinning in 3 dimensions as the artificial gravity generator shut down without warning. Corax bellowed in confusion, his massive arms windmilling uselessly as he tried to grab something solid. And his stone body was not designed for zero gravity. He moved like a boulder thrown into the ocean, sinking in slow motion through empty air. Scylla's lights flickered wildly, patterns breaking down into random noise as panic overrode her careful control. And the other squad members were no better, crashing into walls and each other and crying out in languages that Eli's translator could barely keep up with. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut throughout the station, sealing off corridors and trapping cadets in sections they could not escape. And the lights flickered to red as the computer announced that the reactor had become unstable and would detonate in 15 minutes, and then the boarders came back. 3 times as many as before, pouring through breaches in the hull with weapons blazing. And they did not come in neat waves, they came in chaos. Just like real enemies would, the communication system dissolved into screaming. Every squad in the simulation talking over each other, begging for help, reporting casualties. Losing cohesion as the orderly exercise became a nightmare. Eli grabbed a handrail and stopped his rotation. And he looked at his squad spinning helplessly around him. And he felt something shift inside his chest. Something that had been waiting for this moment his entire life. He had grown up in the belt, in the asteroid mining colonies, where gravity was a luxury and 0G was the natural state. And his body knew this environment the way a fish knows water. Every muscle and instinct adapted for movement without weight. The others were drowning. But Eli was home. "Corax," he said, and his voice was calm. So calm that it cut through the chaos like a blade. "Grab the wall and stop moving." The Korth twisted toward him, eyes wide with something that might have been fear. And for a moment, Eli thought he would refuse, would let his pride destroy them all, but Corax reached out with one massive arm and caught a support beam. And his rotation slowed, and he hung there gasping, waiting for someone to tell him what to do. "Everyone stop talking," Eli said, and he pushed off from the handrail, floating toward the center of the corridor where he could see all of his squad. "Stop moving and listen to me." Scylla's lights flickered with protest, because who was this human to give orders? But she stopped moving, and the others stopped too, because his voice had something in it that demanded obedience, not anger or fear, but certainty. The certainty of someone who knew exactly what needed to be done. "The simulation changed parameters," Eli said. "This is a test of adaptation, not preparation. And we have 14 minutes before the reactor blows." "We know that," Corax growled. "But we cannot move, we cannot fight. We are helpless." "No," Eli said. "You are not helpless. You are just in an environment you do not understand. But I understand it. And I will get us through this if you let me." The silence stretched for 2 seconds. 3 seconds, 4, and then Corax nodded once. A gesture that cost him more pride than Eli would ever know. "Tell us what to do, human." And Eli began to speak. The human reveals himself. Eli moved through the zero gravity like he had been born in it, because in a way he had been, pushing off walls and spinning through hatches and catching handholds without looking, his body remembering every lesson that the asteroid colonies had taught him. "Corax," he said through the communicator, "you and the other Korth are too massive for the maintenance shafts. But that mass is an advantage if you use it correctly." "How?" Corax demanded, still clinging to his support beam like a drowning man holding a rope. Junction 7 is blocked by a sealed bulkhead. And behind that bulkhead are 43 civilians waiting to be evacuated. The controls are on the other side, but the bulkhead itself is just metal. And you are stronger than metal. Understanding flickered in Corax's eyes, and he bared his teeth in something that was not quite a smile. And he began pulling himself along the wall toward Junction 7, his massive body moving slowly but with growing purpose. "Scylla," Eli continued, "your bioluminescence operates on a frequency that the electromagnetic interference cannot affect. You can still signal the other Ythrani, even when the communicators fail." "I know that," Scylla said, her lights still flickering with stress. "But what good does it do? There are 17 civilians trapped in the dark sections where the lighting has failed. They cannot see. They cannot find their way to the evacuation points. But your people can guide them with light. Make a path they can follow." Scylla's patterns shifted, uncertainty becoming determination, and she pushed off toward the nearest dark section with movements that grew smoother as she adapted to the weightlessness Valkorians. Eli said to Dren and Molther, who were still spinning slowly near the ceiling, "You have 4 arms. That means you can anchor with 2 while moving with 2. You are the only ones who can manipulate objects and stay stable at the same time. I need you at the reactor." "The reactor is going to explode," Dren protested. "We cannot stop that. You cannot stop it, but you can slow it. The emergency venting requires physical switches that the computer cannot access. If you can reach them before the countdown ends, you can buy us time." Dren looked at Molther, and some communication passed between them. 4 armed siblings who had grown up together and fought together and had never taken orders from a human before. But they went, pulling themselves along the corridor with increasing confidence. 4 arms proving just as useful as Eli had promised, and then there was only Eli, floating alone in the junction where his squad had been. And he could hear the other squads still screaming on the open channel. Chaos and confusion multiplying as the simulation threw obstacle after obstacle at cadets, who had never faced real unpredictability. He switched to the general frequency. And he spoke, "All squads, this is Cadet Vance. Stop talking and listen." The channel went quiet. Not because they respected him, but because his voice was so calm, so utterly certain, that it did not sound like something from the same reality as their panic. The simulation is testing your ability to adapt, not your prepared tactics. The parameters changed, because real combat always changes. And if you keep trying to fight the scenario you expected instead of the scenario you have, you will fail. Someone started to protest, but Eli kept speaking, his voice steady and clear and impossible to ignore. "Volcorians, you are the only species that can operate effectively in zero-G without training. Use your extra arms to anchor and move. Stop trying to float and start pulling yourselves along surfaces. Korth, you cannot fit through small spaces, but you can break through obstacles that would stop anyone else. Find the sealed bulkheads and force them open. Make new paths where the old ones are blocked. Ythrani, your bioluminescence is your greatest asset right now. The station is full of darkness and confusion. Light the way for others, coordinate without communicators. Be visible when nothing else is." He paused, and in that pause the station shook as something exploded somewhere distant. And the countdown timer on his display dropped below 10 minutes. And everyone else, listen to your squad members who understand this environment better than you do. Pride will kill you. Cooperation will save you. Choose. For 3 heartbeats nothing happened, and Eli thought he had failed. Thought his words had fallen on deaf ears and stubborn minds. And then Carax's voice came through the channel. Rough and grudging, but unmistakable. "The human is right. Do what he says." It was like a dam breaking. Cadets who had been frozen with indecision suddenly moving with purpose. Following the instructions of the quiet human who had never spoken up in class, who had never demanded attention, who had simply watched and waited for the moment when watching and waiting would not be enough. LA pushed off toward the reactor, because someone needed to coordinate the effort there. And he did not trust anyone else to make the right decisions when seconds mattered. He was halfway there when a simulated border appeared from a side corridor. Weapon raised, and Eli did not have time to dodge. Did not have time to do anything except react. He twisted in the air and caught the border's arm with both hands, using the enemy's momentum to spin them both. And then he pushed off against the border's chest and sent himself flying backward through an open hatch while the enemy crashed into the wall behind him. His shoulder hit the edge of the hatchway as he passed through, and he felt something crack, and pain exploded through his arm like fire. But he did not stop, did not slow down, because pain was just information, and information could wait. "Dren, Molther." "Status," he said through gritted teeth. "We reached the reactor," Molther reported. "But there are 12 switches, and we only have time to reach 8 of them. Reach the 8 that matter most. The primary cooling systems. Ignore the secondary backups. We do not need to stop the meltdown completely. We just need to slow it enough for the evacuation to finish." "How do you know which ones are primary?" Dren asked. "Because I grew up on stations like this one," Eli said. "And I learned to read reactor schematics before I learned to read words. Trust me." He did not tell them that he was guessing, that his knowledge of reactor systems was 20 years old and might not apply to alien technology, because doubt would slow them down, and there was no time for slow. The pain in his shoulder was spreading now, making it hard to think, hard to focus. But he pushed through it because that was what humans did. That was the only thing humans had ever been good at. Pushing through when everything said to stop. "Eli." Scylla's voice came through the channel. And it was the first time she had ever used his name instead of just calling him human. The civilians in Dark Section 3 are not responding. I think some of them are injured. Can you reach them? Yes, but I cannot carry them alone. They are too heavy. I am on my way, Eli said, and he changed direction, pushing off toward Dark Section 3 with his one good arm. His broken shoulder screaming with every movement, he reached Scylla in 2 minutes. And together, they found the injured civilians. 3 of them with simulated wounds that would have been fatal in real life. And they carried them one by one through the darkness while Scylla's lights made a path through the chaos. Eli's vision was going gray at the edges by the time they reached the evacuation point. Blood loss or shock or just the limits of a body that was never designed for this kind of punishment. But he did not stop, could not stop, because stopping meant failure, and failure meant proving everyone right about humans. The countdown timer hit 0 just as the last civilian passed through the evacuation portal. And the station did not explode because Dren and Molther had reached enough switches to stabilize the reactor. And the simulation ended with a sound like thunder and a flash of light that left them all blinking in the sudden brightness of the training chamber. Eli collapsed against the wall, his broken shoulder finally demanding the attention he had refused to give it. And he looked up to find every cadet in the room staring at him, not with contempt, not with mockery, but with something else entirely, something that looked almost like respect. Respect earned. The training chamber was silent, except for the sound of heavy breathing and the hum of holographic projectors powering down. And Eli sat against the wall with his broken shoulder cradled against his chest, trying to remember how to breathe without pain. The scoreboard flickered to life above the control platform, displaying the results of the simulation in glowing numbers that made several cadets gasp with disbelief. 94% of civilians successfully evacuated, the highest score in the Academy's recorded history for a first-year cohort facing the advanced chaos scenario. And next to the percentage was a single name listed as Primary Tactical Coordinator Vance. Earth Instructor Vethel stepped down from the platform, her mechanical eye glowing brighter than usual, and she moved through the crowd of stunned cadets until she stood before the injured human slumped against the wall. "Cadet Vance," she said, and her voice was softer than anyone had ever heard it. "Report to medical immediately." Eli nodded, but before he could move, Korax stepped forward, his massive stone body blocking the path between Eli and the door. For a moment, Eli thought the Korth had come to mock him again, to dismiss what had happened as a fluke or an accident, to reassert the natural order where humans were weak and Korth were strong, and nothing could ever change that. But Korax did not mock him. Instead, the massive alien lowered himself to one knee, a gesture so unexpected that several cadets made sounds of shock, because among the Korth, this was a sign of profound respect, given only to those who had earned it through action rather than birth. "I was wrong about you," Korax said, and his grinding voice was quiet now, almost gentle. "I thought I knew what strength was. I thought it meant armor and claws and the ability to destroy. But you taught me something today." He looked up at Eli with eyes that held no contempt, no mockery, only the honest acknowledgement of one warrior recognizing another. "You kept going when the rest of us stopped. You thought when we could only react. You led when we could only follow. And you did it all with a broken body that should have failed long before the simulation ended." Eli did not know what to say, so he said nothing, and Korax continued, "Among my people, we have a word for warriors who fight beyond the limits of their flesh, who refuse to fall even when falling is the only sensible choice. And I never thought I would use that word for a human." He reached out with one massive hand and placed it on Eli's uninjured shoulder, a touch that was surprisingly gentle for something made of living stone. "But I use it now. You are Korath, the Unbreaking, and I would be honored to fight beside you again." Eli felt something shift in his chest, something warm and unexpected, and he managed a small nod. I would be honored too, he said. Scylla approached next, her bioluminescent patterns pulsing in a rhythm that Eli had never seen directed at him before. Complex and beautiful and somehow familiar, even though he had no right to recognize it among the Ythrani. She said, "This pattern means brother. It means one who has shared our light in darkness. One who has earned a place among us not through birth, but through choice." Her lights flickered brighter, and she placed one slender hand over her chest in a gesture of sincerity. "I mocked you because I did not understand you. I saw your silence as weakness and your patience as cowardice. But now I see that your silence was observation and your patience was strategy. And I am ashamed of how I treated you." "You do not need to be ashamed," Eli said. "You did not know. None of you knew. And I did not make it easy for you to learn." "No," Scylla agreed. "You did not. You let us underestimate you." And that was perhaps the most human thing of all. Dren and Molter came forward together, their forearms moving in synchronized patterns that showed their bond as siblings. And they did not speak, but simply nodded at Eli with respect that needed no words. Other cadets followed, some offering words of acknowledgement, others simply meeting his eyes in a way they never had before. And Eli accepted it all with the same calm patience that had carried him through weeks of mockery, because this was not about winning or losing, not about proving himself better than anyone else. It was about surviving long enough for the truth to become visible, for the reality of what humans were to break through the assumptions of what they appeared to be. Instructor Bethel waited until the crowd had thinned, and then she approached Eli one final time. "I knew what you were before you arrived," she said quietly. "I read your file. I studied your species. I understood what persistence predator meant in practice rather than theory. And I designed this simulation specifically to reveal that understanding to your classmates." Eli looked up at her, and he saw something in her scarred face that might have been approval, or might have been respect, or might have been both. "Why?" he asked. "Because this academy exists to train officers who will lead in chaos, who will make decisions when everything falls apart. And that requires understanding that strength comes in many forms. Your classmates needed to learn that lesson, and you were the only one who could teach it." She paused, and her mechanical eye whirred as it focused on his injured shoulder. "Report to medical, and then report to my office. We need to discuss your placement in the advanced tactical track, because you have clearly outgrown the basic program." Eli nodded, and he pushed himself to his feet with his good arm, and he began walking toward the door on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment, but they did not give out, because human legs were stubborn things, built by evolution to carry their owners across endless distances in pursuit of prey that was faster and stronger, but could not match the relentless human refusal to stop at the door. He paused and looked back at the cadets who had mocked him, who had dismissed him, who had learned today that the quiet ones were often the most dangerous. "Humans are not the strongest," he said, and his voice carried through the silent room. "We are not the fastest or the toughest. We have no claws, no armor, no venom. And we sleep for a third of our lives." He smiled, just slightly, and the expression transformed his ordinary face into something that the watching cadets would remember for the rest of their careers. "But we do not stop. We do not quit. We do not surrender. Not to pain, not to fear, not to impossible odds. And that is what makes us dangerous, not what we are, but what we refuse to be." He turned and walked out, leaving silence behind him. And in that silence, the cadets of the Galactic Military Academy began to understand something that their species had never needed to. Learn the most terrifying predator in the universe was not the one with the sharpest claws or the thickest armor. It was the one that simply refused to stop coming, no matter what stood in its way. And humans have been that predator for 200,000 years. 3 years later, when the endless night descended and every species in the compact faced extinction. They would remember this day in the training chamber. They would remember the quiet human who had taught them that survival was not about strength or speed, but about the stubborn refusal to accept defeat. And when the darkness came, they would stand together, Korth and Euthrani and Velkorian and human. And they would not stop, would not quit, would not surrender because Eli Vance had taught them how, and that lesson would save them all.